to record that I forgot to do. So much for sticky notes, huh? So let's talk about what human-centered design is, why it's important to design, with change management. The idea behind human-centered design, it's a couple of things. Why do we do it? Because we find a better return on that. Companies where HR delivers programs with the highest level of value are 5 times more likely to use human-centered design principles, meaning they're delivering experiences rather than programs. And I know that sounds buzzworthy, if you would, but the idea is human-centered design moves away from seeing what you create as a program or a process and starts thinking of them as experiences. So the first part of it is the mindset and the focus. We're not building a program or a process, we're building an experience. And like I said, it sounds a little buzzy, but as we talk about it, you'll see how it works. The solutions that they come up with are more focused on need and experience. And then the focus on process and tools is to make them compelling, enjoyable, and simple. Okay. And you do a lot of that work, but it may be process centric rather than customer centric. There's a small yet meaningful difference between human-centered design and design thinking. We'll talk about those. Best example I have is the open office. Now tell me, when you were in an office, if you're working from home now, when you were in an office, was it an open office environment? Were there closed offices? Were there cubicles? Give me just an idea. Open office. You loved the open office, didn't you? Everybody loves the open office, right? It's all over the place. I mean, I'm kind of an office nerd, so allow me a little detour here. 14 years of remote work as a regional dude, 10 years of consulting. I haven't had an office in 24 years. I mean, here's my office. I've got a golden laying right there, etc. I've got my house right there. But I don't have the issues that others have in the open office. But whenever I got to see one, I was always impressed. Look at that kitchen. Look at all that cereal. Look at that place for a hands-on meeting. Look at that AstroTurf. Look at the collaboration that goes on. Then I spent more time there, and what I saw was this. And what I saw was this. Somebody had a question, and they text the person sitting right across from them. So much promise with the open office, but it never materialized. Think of cubicles, though. Those of you that have worked in cubicle environments, you love those too, didn't you? Love being part of the cubicle farm, right? So the idea is corporations took that, and I'm trying to think of the right word to use. I know the word I want to use. I've got to be professional here. They took that concept and they economized it. Let's put it that way. That's the same thing that's happened with design thinking. Same thing that happened with cubicles. Design thinking morphed into this let go and play idea. So it's let's get a group in a room with a bunch of Legos and have them work on solving a puzzle, and that's going to create a skill set that's going to transfer to the workforce. In my experience, that's a fool's errand, especially if you have executives that walk by and stop and look in that conference room. Why are they playing with bricks? But those are human-centered experiences. Design thinking has taken a bit of a hard hit because it's gotten away. That pendulum has swung too far towards play. But as we get into it, I'd like you to think of design thinking as behind the scenes and not necessarily the structured development experience side of it. You can find HBR articles on it. But the idea, it's a good opportunity to differentiate, but I would just say proceed with caution, because it can swing too far. So best example of user experience versus design. So tell me your thoughts on this photo. Chat, open mic, whichever you're comfortable with. What does that tell you about people and how they use systems? Desire lines. Yeah, they'll always find the easiest path. They'll do what they're comfortable with. They'll take this, the shortest distance between A and B. Yeah, they'll do what's convenient. Okay. So the question becomes, why wasn't it designed like that? They probably didn't ask the users as an architect. The architect said, this looks really good. Maybe the financial people said, you don't have to build the curves, there's not as much cost, etc. But people will always do that. So if you put people at the center of the design, it's going to be a lot different. Okay. So I want to introduce you to an organization named IDEO, and they can be found at ideo.org. And what they talk about is when you are designing, you should go through 3 different phases. First phase is inspiration. I have a design challenge. I need to build this. I need to go ahead and build this walkway, build this quadrangle, build this open space for people. And I've got a design challenge. I'm looking for inspiration. Okay. Second part of it is what they call ideation. Okay. I have an opportunity to design. I have an opportunity to use these kind of materials. I have an opportunity to get these kind of systems to talk to each other. I have an opportunity where I have systems that haven't talked to each other, and I can go to Workday. Okay. Or I've got an opportunity to upgrade the systems, okay? And then there's actually the implementation. So IDEO, when they talk about design thinking, they talk about 3 phases. I have a design challenge, I've got an opportunity for design, and then I have an innovative solution, okay? The idea that bleeds through all 3 of those or connects them is learn from your customer, bring order to what you learn, and build it and take it to market. Okay. So inspiration, I have a design challenge. The focus should be learning from your customer. Okay. Those are the best systems, and that's what the best architects do. The ideation, I've got an opportunity design, is to bring order to what you learned. Okay. If they had talked to the customer would have said, yeah, I need to get in the building and I'm going to go this way. Okay. Or they might have said other things like the brick gets hot, or, I can't run a skateboard over it, or those kind of things on a college campus. Then when you get to the implementation, I've got an innovative solution. It's build it and take it to market. Okay. So what's at the core of all this is a concept called deep empathy. Okay. And as you think about empathy, and we'll get into that, but I want you to think about having that kind of deep empathy with your customer. There's a focus by putting the human perspective into all parts of it to meet their needs. But it basically talks about there's a possibility that technology can help that. There's a business part of it. But the idea is too many times we build programs and process and we don't put the customer at the center of it. So let me ask you, and you can use ATCO, or you can use a previous employer if you're more comfortable, whichever one you want. But what kind of fails have you seen when it comes to design? Not just office, but maybe systems. What sort of things have not worked for you? Think process, think tools, think systems you use. Okay, Lauren, ones that are overcomplicated, hard to explain why we do it. Okay. Ones that don't connect with the user. Yep. So much easier to email than complete a service request. Yep. That's a challenge now. This is client one upstairs is out at an appointment, so I've got the golden here, but being her junior HR advisor and the massive change that they're going through right now, I hear this all the time. My wife is the assistant director of operations at a school at the university. And, her faculty can fill out a form, but it's easier to call Laura. Okay. What Laura has seen is her network's disappearing. Her network's retiring. Her connections are gone. She calls the registrar's office and they say, "Hi, how can I help you?" And she says, "Is Jane there?" It's like, "Oh, Jane retired. Oh, this person's not here anymore." So especially at senior levels, we're seeing those networks disappear a little bit. So yeah, poor communication, just focused on the goal. Carrie, is that more of the just let's get it done and move on to the next because there's so many in the queue? I guess agile people would call that an MVP, a minimum viable product. They have nice ways of framing these things. But let's get it done. Let's ship it. Let's move on. Let's cut and paste. Yeah, definitely, Jeff, with software rather than step by step. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's a specialist fallacy. Everybody wants to know everything. Too many things going on at the same time, definitely. Yeah, you think of systems that don't talk to each other, tools. I'll show you one that's this one's fascinating. I decided my laptop was 8 years old, so I get a new one. So I asked the guy at the Apple store, I said, do you have those earbuds? And he kind of looked at me and I said, "Oh, sorry, boomer mistake. That was the movie with the golden retriever." So, got these AirPods that, fit in there, etc. You get them and they sync up right away. All you have to do is connect your Bluetooth and then it connects to all your other devices. So it connects to both laptops, it connects to the phone. Don't have to do it again. So, Apple's a good example of a company that I think gets design pretty well. And the next one is from Steve Jobs, and it talks about design is not just how it looks and feels, it's how it works. So here I am trying to figure out all this stuff. So I go and watch a YouTube video. And the guy was talking about how they had worked on the click sound on there. I mean, they're crazy as far as it comes to design, but think Apple versus Microsoft design. We label it high level, intuitive versus functional. Sometimes it's not as intuitive as we think it is, but the idea is, how it works isn't about just how it technically works. It's about how it actually works for the specific people who are supposed to be using it. And that's true not just of the change itself, but how it's managed, and how you change is just important as the change itself. So I want to share with you a real life example, something that unfortunately some of you have had the experience of going through, and that is an MRI. Okay. So here's the background. I'm going to show you a short video on it too. It's just about a minute long video. Guy named Doug Dietz worked for GE Healthcare, and they tasked him with designing a new MRI machine. And he worked on it for many years, and when it was done, it won a lot of awards. It was a pretty impressive piece of machinery, okay? So let me ask you, just in the chat with a thumbs up or just think, how many of you have had an MRI? I know legally I probably can't ask you that, but if you're comfortable telling us you've had an MRI, just give us a thumbs up in there. I mean, I have, yeah, and that's what you remember. It was loud, it's claustrophobic. It's not a pleasant experience at all, okay? So let me show you a brief video, and for those of you that I'm bringing you back to that trauma, I apologize in advance. But let's show you a quick video for those of you that have not had the pleasure of an MRI. Luckily, that was only about 30 seconds of it. So, you know, when you think of the MRI experience from a design standpoint, pretty poor design, okay? You know, he went to the hospital, Doug, from GE Healthcare, to see one of the machines being installed and used. And the patient he got to see was a little girl. And as she approached the machine, she was crying. Her parents were trying to comfort her, but she was scared, okay? Think about that video. It's scary as an adult. Think of what it must be like for a child. The little girl was so upset they had to sedate her so she would be still enough for the scans to be taken. I mean, not only that, those of you that haven't had that, you have to sit absolutely still for however long you're in there, okay? So with that in mind, he's thinking, I've got to do something different, okay? So let me come at this using some design thinking principles. So what he did was he looked at it from a child's level and said, if I'm a child, sorry, flipped on the wrong screen share there. I don't know why that came back up. Just a second. Hang on, let's get rid of this guy. Don't know why it wants to show you the video again. Oh, hang on a sec. There we go. Yeah, that's where I wanted to get to. Let's share that screen, okay? Come on, Mark. It was sharing. Oh, it shared the desktop, sorry. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduled programming here. So he looked at it from the level of a child and saw how big and scary the machine was, and he felt like he had failed. You know, a sizable portion of his users, the pediatric patients, were having a horrible experience with it. So he started doing a little research. He found out that 80% of pediatric patients had to be sedated when they had an MRI. And he decided he needed to fix that. So he tried to figure out how to do this, and he kept coming up against a design wall. So what he did was he got with an organization at Stanford called the D School. So the Stanford Design School, he went and worked with them. They teach human-centered design. And he used those principles and looking at the MRI machine as a problem, okay? Focused on reaching out to users, talk to the patients, talk to their parents, the siblings, the nurses, the doctors, the therapists, went to daycare centers, talked to people at children's museums. Anybody who had insights into how children operate and what motivates them. I know some of you have that. I don't have kids. But, you know, the idea is he realized in addition to being scared of the machine, they wanted a sense of adventure, especially the kids that were chronically ill and missing out on so many things because of the illness. And with that in mind, here's what he came up with. Okay, so this is one that he came up with of the Adventure Series scanner. And we had a lady in one of our courses, University of Pittsburgh, that was one of the pilot locations for this. Fascinating to hear about it from a business standpoint. So he created this experience built around having an adventure. The first one was the pirate ship, the bottom left slide. And he didn't just make the machine itself look like a ship, The whole room was redesigned to support the story. There were lights, sounds, aromatherapy to really create an experience. They also gave the technicians scripts to say things like, all aboard the pirate ship. And the kids were told they had to be quiet and still in the machine or the other pirates would hear them. All sounds great. Here's what happened. The rate of sedation for the patients that went through the pirate ship MRI dropped to 10% from 80%. Think of the cost savings along with being better for the patients and the parents. Think of the lower costs, the more efficiency. You didn't have to wait for an anesthesiologist. You didn't have to reschedule appointments when kids refused to get in the machine, etc. When Doug went back to see this in action, he heard a little girl say, "Can I come back tomorrow?" I mean, you talk about your heart being full for the work you do. You know, obviously he'd been successful, and once he knew that, he replicated it with other themes and adventures. They did one called Coral City, which is the bottom right. They did the top right, which was called Cozy Camp. They did those. So with that in mind and hearing that story, let me ask you is, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts about that story? I mean, it's a nice story, but from a business perspective, what are your thoughts? And think forward a little bit. What if you use some human-centered design at ATCO? What would your customer experience be like? What would your business unit experience be like? I mean, a lot of times, you know, things for kids are designed by adults. You don't understand the kid point of view. And I think sometimes things at organizations are designed by people who don't have to do that job and don't have that experience. And human-centered design's a way to overcome that problem. So let me reframe my question is, how could this help your leaders? What would their response be? That costs too much money, that's kind of goofy, that's silly, or hey, I'm up for it, let's pilot it, let's see if it works? Would that be something you would even put out there, or would it be dismissed? I mean, I'm not starry-eyed about this. I think it's a challenge with some leaders. It really is. Okay, Krista, so some would be open to it. Okay. What if, though, you went to the leader and said something like, take a business metric that they use in their business and along the lines of, we have to sedate 80% of our patients, and by doing this, we could drop that sedation rate to 10%. It's all in how you frame it, okay? Yeah, absolutely. If it increases the adoption and it brings us a return on the investment, absolutely, okay? So GE Healthcare has been doing a lot of human-centered design in their work. Apple's another example of a company that if you're an Apple user, you know that. What are some other organizations that you like the design of their products that help with, to Judy's point, adoption of systems, of new ways of doing things, or save some money, time? What are some other companies that you've worked with, either inside or outside of work? Alexa, yeah, definitely plug and play, yeah. Think of some of the apps you use. Think of how you've been shopping the last few months. What are some organizations, products, services? It's a hard question. I could ask which ones you don't like. That's easy. Spotify, yep, absolutely. Um, Give me some more as you think about them. I'll show you a couple of mine. UPS has an app called My Choice. And Teddy was my UPS guy who was really good. Used to bring my dogs biscuits, leave the package out of the rain. I went to Teddy one day when I was out walking dogs. I said, "Hey, I'm expecting a plane ticket tomorrow because I got to get on a plane on Thursday. And it says I have to sign for it. And I don't want to drive across town to pick up that ticket because I have to sign for it." He said, "Do you have the UPS My Choice app?" I said, "No." He said, "Go install that and you can customize everything about your delivery." Okay. So now I have them bring it to the back door. Okay. So I ordered my mother's birthday present and I said, "Put on the back door and notify me when delivered." Okay. So apps are there. Amazon, absolutely. That was the one I was thinking, phenomenal. And if you were staying at Hilton's like I was, you could use your Hilton points on Amazon. Netflix, absolutely. Here's a recommendation. One of the things we like about that is you put it in your videos and then it gives you a couple of seconds of preview of it to watch. So we watched something the other night that we wouldn't have normally watched. Okay. Save on Foods. Yep. Online order, grocery pickup. Oh, don't get me started on Starbucks because they are phenomenal. I definitely want to talk about those. I think the beginning of the third week, we'll kind of talk about Starbucks a little bit. Definitely human-centered design. Okay, so think back. Those of you that have had that ROI, that MRI, I'm thinking ROI, was the ROI of your MRI. I had a shoulder injury, torn up the shoulder. 2 hours in a narrow tube with that noise. After an hour, they slid me out of it and said, "You were moving too much." I was almost in tears. And I left and I said, I'm not going through this again after 2 hours. And, I'm not going to do it again, even though I need it. Okay. So, it was that bad of an experience. But if I could have a pirate ship, I, I might be the one that says I go back and do it. But let me get back to ATCO. Do you have any processes or programs or experiences in your organization that people come back to because they want more? Are there anything that HR does that people want more of? I mean, some people have told me skip level meetings they liked, stay interviews. I don't see anybody rushing to answer that question. So this might be an opportunity for you to think about, when we put things together, are we using design thinking? Are we doing HR to the organization when we should be doing HR with the organization? And how can we get the customer involved to do more of that? Okay. So the idea, yeah, LR's labor relations, absolutely. Yep. Martha's ERC training. You have to tell me what ERC is. Sorry, I don't know that one. I'll put Martha on the spot and say, "What do you do to make it so popular?" So the idea, employee resource center. Thank you. I did not know that. But on we would call them employee resource groups. So pretty much, yeah. Again, those tend to be popular. Development tends to be popular. Some of the things, raises and compensation, tend to be popular. But stay interviews, skip level meetings, recognition, reward, those kind of things. But think about human-centered design, and why aren't you telling me that about more of your programs? Okay. Why? Because we're just starting to get into this and there are some obstacles to it. So you can kind of see the companies that do it. Kaiser is a healthcare organization. If you want to go offline and talk to me sometimes about healthcare in America, Kaiser is phenomenal. They have an app. You can do televisits with your doctor. You can order prescription refills online and make appointments. Adobe, I mentioned yesterday, Adobe with their check-in. Deloitte does a program with executives. It's called MCC, Mass Career Customization. book called The Leadership Lattice about that. Very interesting. But design thinking, here's the thing about design thinking. Human-centered design is one part of design thinking. So let's place that brick in that pathway. When we talk about human-centered design is one part of design thinking. What design thinking does, it takes what's desirable from a human point of view with what's technologically feasible and economically viable. So it's not just pie in the sky stuff. It's not just, oh, these are things that are nice to have, okay? Traditionally, as organizations design processes and tools and systems, they're focused on technical and business aspects. But if you ignore the human factor, you may end up with obstacles to achieving success. You may find out that some of the systems cause higher turnover. They cause delays in the project, reduce productivity. But of course, if you focus only on employees and making them happy, you're diluting the change, which means they're not going to be successful either. So the key is to balance these three components: the human, the technical, and the business, okay? So let's look at another real world example, okay? Get out your phone. You probably got that handy. Tell me, what do you think the designers were thinking about their users when they designed their phone? What are some of the things that they might have been looking at when they designed your phone? Simple. Yep. No user guides. Yep. Ease of use. Ease of use, so you can use it in the dark. You can turn off the alarm. Those of us that wear glasses, so you can see it. Yeah. The face recognition, definitely. I just got the new laptop with the Touch ID. You know, that one with the Touch ID. Yep. I did not get rose gold. You know, size, easy to keep close, multifunction, yeah, waterproof, maybe not water resistant. Interesting, if you go to the phone screen where you call, why is the call button green and the end call button red? Why in Zoom is screen sharing green but stop share is red? Because we know that from driving, okay? It's interesting, if you look at the people that do this kind of work, they're called UI UX engineers. And it is a hard position to fill, right up there with network systems people and cloud engineers. Very hard position to fill, but that's UI UX design, okay? You know, think about in the toolkit on page 12, you've got some called discovery questions for human-centered design. So something to think about as a resource for you. Talks about interviews, focus groups, observation, testing, things that we already did, but about a dozen questions to get you started in doing that. So, you know, the idea at a glance, what is design thinking? It's a framework that helps you redefine problems to seek solutions that you might not have thought of. And it is iterative. It obviously empathizes with the user, but it may test some of your assumptions because it's not a linear process, meaning it's not as efficient as some other processes that you use, okay? So as you think about design thinking, you know, interesting, here's the fit on that certification pathway brick, is those first three hexagons: empathize, define, and ideate. Those are human-centered design. Prototype and test get added in, and that's design thinking. So that's kind of a visual of how human-centered design nests within design thinking. Basically, the first three steps in the process: empathize, define, and ideate. That's what we're going to focus on, because prototyping and testing, that's about building solutions quickly, testing them, making changes, testing again. That's shortening cycle time. That's minimum viable product. That's scrums. That's skunk works. That's more agile. But we're going to talk about these three steps in terms of change management and how you can use that to recognize change opportunities. Um, Another model that I'll just reference here, if you want to Google it and look at it, it's called the Design Council Double Diamond, is another way of looking at this. This is the one from the Stanford D School. But again, agile, why that's getting popular is because it's a shorter cycle time. So let's talk about empathy a little bit, okay? It's about understanding your audience. You do this all the time when you stop and think about it. You know, you've got to engage with the people in various ways so you understand their experiences and motivations as well as their physical environments. Things like on page 12 of the toolkit, interviews, focus groups, observation, testing, those kind of things. Think about what employees say related to the change, what they do in their jobs, what they think and feel about their jobs, their work, anything else related to the change you're designing or you're managing. What empathy does is you set aside your assumptions and you really truly put yourself in the employee's shoes. If you've done the job, it's a little easier to do, okay? And when I was at university, I unloaded trucks. I worked at a liquor store as a cashier. I did deliveries. I understood what it was like to be on your feet for 8 hours a day or unload trucks, you know, in the middle of summer. So it was easy for me to empathize with them, but I don't know that I actually put myself in their shoes. I think I was looking at it from how can I create a process that helps them do their jobs better, okay? So the idea though is you truly put yourself in their shoes, okay? It's kind of like being an anthropologist. You know, hard data is important, but in human-centered design, it's used in combination with other sources of information. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you the next slide. We're going to do this a little differently than it says on the slide because that's how it works in the online environment. So this is going to be part of your quote unquote homework, and it's interviewing for empathy. What I'm going to ask you to do between now and Wednesday is to interview someone that you work with, interview somebody in the organization, and try to use deep empathy and really understand what he or she says, does, and thinks about the change that you identified in the pre-work, okay? So if you were working on the customer project, if you were working on process and systems, if you were working on with the internal consultants or the reorg or the communication, find somebody, maybe one of your peers here in the course, you know, and find out what do they think and feel about the change that you're working on, you know, or a change that they're managing or experiencing right now. You can use the questions on page 12 in the toolkit, and you can also use page 13 in the toolkit. So 13 is just a nice place to capture some notes, and it's got kind of a replication of that slide there, okay? So that's going to be your first quote unquote homework assignment, interview for empathy, okay? Let me do one more thing, then we'll take a quick break here. Let's talk about define and ideate, then we'll take a quick break. So empathy was the first one that we wanted to talk about of those hexagons, okay? So empathy, let's talk about define. You know, it seems kind of common sense, defining, figuring out what the problem is you're trying to solve. You're the subject matter expert. Of course, you know what the problem is you're trying to solve. But it's important to start by asking questions about the problem to fully understand it before jumping to solutions. You see this a lot, okay? Those of you that are dog lovers will understand this story. I'm going to tell you about SOAP, S-O-A-P. We've had about 8 dogs. We used to show them. We've hunted them a little bit. We didn't get so into that. But we've had about 8 dogs over the years, and unfortunately, a lot of them have gotten cancer. And we've had some, veterinary experiences. And we have a really good vet for about the last 20 years. So we were waiting for some test results to come back with one of the flatcoats that had cancer. And I asked Dr. Joseph, I said, how long did you go to veterinary school? What did you learn, etc.? I said, what was the biggest thing you learned in vet school that stuck with you? He said, soap. I said, like, wash your hands for 20 seconds, sing the happy birthday song. He's like, that's not really what it is. He said, soap is symptoms, observations, assessments, and then prescription. So what he said, if you tell me my dog hurt his leg and Google tells me I need you to prescribe this, I'm going to say, okay, let me go ahead and ask you what are the symptoms. Dog won't put weight on the foot, holds it up, presents like this, whines a little bit, etc. And then he's going to say, okay, now I'd like you to come in and I want to see the dog walk down the hallway. I want to go ahead and see how he moves. How's his gait? How's his biomechanics work, etc. Then I'm going to do some assessments. It might be as simple as palpating it, and if I touch it and they yelp, I'm going to order an X-ray. It might be a stretch test to see if it's a tendon or a ligament, etc. So he said, only then will I prescribe. I need to know the symptoms, observations, and assessment before I make a prescription. I said, that's interesting. That happens in my line of work a lot too with clients. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'll get people to call me up and say, I need you to come in and work with my executives on presentation skills, on influence. I need you to work with our middle managers on how to do better evaluations, how to do 360s, on change management, on workforce planning. And here's exactly what I want you to do. And I say, that's great. But I'd like to come in and spend some time with you and talk with you and find out what are the symptoms, what are the observations, what are the assessment before I decide a course is the best way to do it. Maybe it's one-on-one, maybe it's 360s, maybe it's something where I set them up to do it. The idea is just like, not that your people are animals, but just like animals, every organization has a dis-ease. Notice how I typed that. So thinking about SOAP and thinking about empathy and how can you apply those to organizational dis-ease, okay? How we doing? We're at about the top of the hour. I do want to give you about a 5-minute stretch. So hit me up in the chat if you have any questions about what we talked about so far or any other ideas. And we'll be back in about 5 minutes. So thanks for a great session so far. 2 more minutes, please. 2 more minutes. All right, and we are back. And I think before we get into the next 2 pieces, just important that I do recognize it's 5 in the afternoon in Alberta. I want to thank you for, I know it's towards the end of the day. I keep asking these open-ended questions. So, um, and John and Annabelle, and you've got the benefit of morning. So, again, I'm interested also, I'll get your feedback on the format too. We haven't done this format before. So we usually either do it in 2 whole days or over the course of 4 weeks. So I like this format so far. So hopefully you're capturing some good notes and things. I understand why a lot of you have your camera off, and that's fine with me. So again, the mic's always open, the chat, whichever you're most comfortable with. But where we kind of left off was talking about this idea of human-centered design being part of design thinking, okay? So again, we'll kind of recap those, but we talked about interviewing for empathy. They made a note to work on that. Let's kind of dip into this idea of defining a little bit. What's the problem from a human point of view? Thinking about people and systems. And I know you do this in a lot of your work, but the idea is also then looking for patterns, okay? And framing the problem clearly. You've had this happen before. You go home, you ask your significant other, you're talking at dinner, and you say something, and they'll say, have you thought of it like this? And you're like, no. So it's important to ask questions about the problem to fully understand it before you start jumping into solutions. I think we have a bias for action, and we tend to jump towards solutions right away. You put together the information you've created during the empathize stage, along with what you find out in your observations, your data, your SOA, as I mentioned from my vet example, that helps you define the core problem that your change needs to address, or that your change management approach needs to consider, okay? And then the third step of ideate, are what are all the possible ways to solve the problem? What are all the possible ways, taking into account what we know about the employees that are affected, okay? So very interesting. We've had a lot of different people over the different courses I've done talk about how they do that at their organization. But let me ask you more about this slide specifically. Do you have more of the bias towards action of let's get it done and put it out there, or is it making it perfect? Give me a little insight into the culture. Is it more, we've got so many things in the queue, let's get it done, let's ship, let's move on, we're busy? Or is it, let's make it perfect? Okay. That's what I was thinking. You're confirming, but here we are. Close these blinds a little bit. Blinding Colorado sun. Yeah, this is. I knew this is where you were at. Let's call it a performance-based meritocracy to be professional. We judge things based on execution, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the challenge is, how do we go ahead and work this ideation portion? Because we tend to go back towards the ways that we've done things before. So one of the first things it says is, think about fresh ideas, not just best practices. Human needs, multiple techniques. The thinking is, you've got a problem and you've got a north and south pole, okay? So you have this way of doing or this way of not doing. So you can take any problem and say, we're going to do something about it, we're not going to do anything about it. You've got 180 degrees of latitude within there. You tend to hit on that one band of latitude that you've always used and has always worked for you. So the idea is, consider different things. And sometimes it's a structural change. I come from that environment. You know who I worked for. You can imagine what the culture was like. It was about getting things done and getting them done fast. I mean, one of the things that you incessantly talk about is a sundown rule. Finish it by the end of the day. It was a focus on execution and getting things done. Had a boss. We walked into a conference room one day for a staff meeting, and over the weekend they had come in, they had painted a whole wall with that blackboard paint that you could write on. It was awkward. But over time, it totally changed the way we looked at problems just by changing that structure. Sometimes it might be having people submit ideas before a meeting. But what you're trying to do, however you do it, is to get them to think, what if, what else, why not? How might we do this better, okay? Stanford D School says you've got to watch out for what they call the planning zone. And it's a little different definition, okay? What they do is they say on one end of the continuum, you've got experimentation. On the other end of it, you've got exploration, okay? We can come at it in a totally fresh new way, or on the other way, we can explore it the way we've always done it, okay? And they said it's interesting because in the middle of that is the planning zone. So to kind of go with the latitude idea, they're kind of the doldrums. It's kind of where there's no wind towards the equator. But their idea is, if you're talented experts, which most of you are, especially those of you with specialties, the idea is, if you take a talented expert and you put in human-centered design, that's the way to spark innovation, okay? And that's what you're trying to do, is spark some innovation. Sorry, I got some sounds going on over here that I thought were not going on. I have a new touch bar on that I'm trying to figure out. So the idea is, take a talented expert, add in human-centered design, and see how it affects results, okay? So let me show you one more short video, about a minute and a half of what they did, and we'll come back and talk about it. I don't think I need a whole lot of setup here, but let me go ahead and show you that one. There we go. So as you watch that, what did you think of that? I mean, just in general, not business related, but what if you came across something like that? Experimentation, very creative, something different. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it took the Swedes to do it. Would never happen here. My country would never happen. Great for kids. Yeah. Here's the business result. 66% more stair walking. Yep. There you go, Jeff. You asked the key question is how did that affect results? 66% more stair walking. The change in the structure drove the behavior change. I think back to what I learned really the first day of organization development school was sometimes to drive behavior change, you need to change systems. Sometimes to change systems, you got to drive behavior change. So you're thinking about both of those. So yeah, I don't know the follow-up. That fun theory website might have it. I have not looked into it. But I know it helps with the business. We've got a light rail system here, and we've got a program in Denver called 1% for Art, or if it's a taxpayer-funded project, 1% of the total cost has to go to art. So there's all kinds of neat art, interactive things at the train stations, and they get you off the focus of you're waiting for a train, okay? So again, did it sustain high usage? Yeah, it'd be interesting. But as you're doing your systems work, think about you're trying to design systems that are going to change behavior. Why wouldn't you talk to your customer? Why wouldn't you do focus groups? Why wouldn't you interact? And I understand that's a hard balance as you have the pressure to ship and get done and get to market, okay? So it's going to do it to me again. Sorry. Go away. It seems to like, oh, that's why it seems to like that screen share right there. Sorry. There we go. So we had done some work with a company called Lever, not Unilever, but Lever, a small talent acquisition company in San Francisco. So we partnered with them on design thinking research. They use design thinking throughout the organization. They have, let me get my, sorry, I want to get my, trying to get my chat to float on top, but it's not. Lever dot, I think it's lever.co. You might need to correct me on that. If not, I can send it to you. But about 140 employees based in San Francisco. They saw a problem in talent acquisition. They had low rates of applications based on how many people actually saw the job description. So they went through the human-centered design steps of empathize, define, and ideate, okay? What's the experience of a job seeker? What are they looking for? Why aren't candidates compelled to apply based on the job descriptions? And what would make them excited or ecstatic to submit a resume? Based on that process, they made a change to timeline-based job descriptions. Pretty interesting, timeline-based job description. Those of you that work with job descriptions, you know what the problems with them are. They're 4 or 5 pages. They include things up to and included by supervisor. They're not an accurate portrayal of what the role really is. They're compliance documents. We know the manifest issues with job descriptions, okay? The point is, what if we change the way we did job descriptions? They moved to a job description format that said, here's what the job looks like and what expectations would be at various points after hire, within 30 days, within 60 days. They got a lot of positive feedback from the applicants, and they saw an increase in their application rates, okay? As you look at that blog post, they actually said that they saw a difference with their clients that moved to timeline-based job descriptions. Numbers aren't great, but there's difference. If they use timeline-based job descriptions, 31% said they were doing a better job of building sustainable talent pipelines. Only 16% said without. So it almost doubled. I mean, the numbers are low, 16 and 31%, but that was a shift in thinking, okay? That made a shift in business results. I'm trying to link everything here except for the stairs, which is just fun, to business results. So it just basically they designed it, and I can, this citation at the bottom, designing and refining talent acquisition, explains it in some detail. But basically what they did was said, here, let me, instead of giving you a job description, we're going to go ahead and format it as what your employment experience would be like. So after 30 days, this is what your job will look like. This is what the expectations are. This is the development you get after 60 days, 90 days, a quarter, a year. So hasn't really scaled, is a different approach, a new approach. I actually had a client in Boston that liked, I think I mentioned yesterday, or it was another course, but they used RACI, and they redid their job descriptions based on RACI. So again, took an issue, came at it using human-centered design, and came up with some different results. So one more concept on human-centered design, and then we'll kind of move into partnership a little bit. So pretty new stuff. In your toolkit on page 14, it gives you some information on this concept called nudging, okay? And there's a phenomenon out there called psychological reactance, which sounds very pedagogical, but psychological reactance is a negative reaction that people have in response to feeling like someone or something is taking away their choices or limiting the range of alternatives they had. We see this a lot with benefit plans, obviously, is a good example from the HR world. But so the key is to make sure that people feel in the midst of change that they have some choices and some controls. And nudges are a way to do this, to ensure employees feel like they have choices while still maintaining and maximizing the chance that people will change their behavior if you want them to. The book is called Nudge, and it's by a guy named Thaler, Richard Thaler. Interesting book. Thaler, and there's another one, it's on my other bookshelf. It is, did I write that one down? I'll get you that one. The Sunstein book. So I owe you the Sunstein book. Quick note on that. So some recent research that's been done on this by Thaler. He wrote the book, and he said, people become resistant when they feel choices are being limited or taken away. That's the problem. The solution is nudging, okay? So what nudges are is gentle ways of reminding people and moving them towards it. They ensure people feel like they have a choice, and that makes the behavior more desirable. So in the toolkit, it has a couple of examples from the real world. And the one that I like is, I don't know if it's on there or not. Yeah, the ATM example. When you go to the ATM and you put in your card, people were forgetting their cards. And so now when you use the newer ATMs, your card stays in there until the end of the transaction, then it beeps at you to take it out, okay? So that's one thing the banks did. The printer one's interesting because my wife went through that with the printing. She had people printing manuals and they were being charged on their service level agreement, and they went and reset the defaults on the printers and nobody knew how to change it, okay? But the example is here in the US, the 401k plan, you know, it's a retirement plan. The idea is you are now, through a law change a few years ago, allowed to auto enroll people in there, and they have to opt out of it. And you have to make that easy for them to opt out. But the default is they're enrolled, and that significantly increases the number of people that contribute to their retirement plan compared to companies where the default is you're not enrolled, okay? So Thaler actually won the Nobel Prize for economics for his work on this. So pretty dense stuff. Yeah, Carol, great insight. So with our pension and benefits provider, yep, definitely. Um, is it and Judy, I promise to remain apolitical. I've got about 8 masks spread all over the house. I don't understand why that's an issue. I don't know if it's an issue there, but I'd sure like to talk to any of you offline about that. But I would hope so. We seem to be a little less scientifically driven in my country right now. So let's talk offline about that. So Nudge, improving decisions about health, wealth, and happiness by Thaler is interesting. I'm going to show you a video in our last session. Sorry, my screen is acting up. A guy named Dan Heath, the whole field of behavioral economics. Some of you might have seen the Freakonomics books. So pretty interesting stuff out there on that. That's what I did wrong. I'll find that Sunstein book, which is on the other bookshelf. So wrapping up our human-centered design, let me give you just a minute to think about it, and let me frame it for you, okay? Again, on the certification piece, there is a difference between human-centered design and design thinking beyond the hexagons. Both of them use problem solving, but you've got to have those 3 elements: viability, feasibility, and desirability, okay? Viability, should you do something? Feasibility, can you do something? And desirability, will people want to do something, okay? Page 16 in the toolkit has got some good stuff about getting started with it. Told you I was a big toolkit guy, and it sounds like in your culture, these are good things because you're gonna have to put some things into action to see the benefit of it. But if you're not currently using it, it says, start with things that you're familiar with. Think about everybody involved in it. Think about barriers in communication, consistency, predictability, collaboration, iterative approaches. So some good stuff in there for you to use. So you might want to flag page 16 on the toolkit. But again, at this point, you might be thinking they sound pretty similar, and you're right, in a way they are. But the real important difference is design thinking looks at the bigger picture. It focuses more on innovation, creating products or services that solve problems. HCD, human-centered design, tends to look more granularly at the details about usability and user experience. So design thinking is more of a process. Human-centered design is more of a mindset. And despite their differences, you can use them in conjunction if you've got the mindset, the human-centered design, and the toolkit, which is the design thinking. So I'll send you some more resources on those during the week. So with that, we're going to go ahead and shift gears. Let me just kind of check, see if there's any questions, comments, concerns, anything not tracking with. And my second question before we shift gears, where do you think you could use this? Carol had talked about a little bit with pension and benefits. Are there some other areas of your business that you could use some human-centered design, or that you already do that maybe you haven't thought about it in those terms? Open mic or chat, either one. Finish my tea. Got the Canada mug today. It's for you guys. New systems, yeah. Do you interview people? Do you talk to the users with new systems? Do you pilot those? Do you test them? Do you have sandboxes set up? I mean, because systems is a big one, and benefits are the 2 big ones. So HRIS and total rewards were the 2 areas I was thinking about. What about in L&D? What about in hiring? What about in some of your employee relations systems? So give it some thought. And what I'd like you to do is take that last slide and add that to your homework, if you would. You have a space in the toolkit. I don't know if that's an effective way of doing it, is holding it up. I'm sure I could do it like that. But page 16 in the toolkit, said, reflect on what we've talked about, HCB. Come up with one idea, okay? That think about that change initiative, that change challenge that you brought with you, that you described yesterday in your introduction, and think about how you can apply human-centered design for that, okay? So interviewing for empathy, HR elevator speech, and page 16 in the toolkit using HCD. So let's shift gears and work through our last half hour together today. And what I've got is another short video. There's about 8 videos in the course. I use about 5 of them, and 3 of them happen to fall right in this little area right here. So the idea here is, when we're architecting and we're partnering with the business, the human-centered design process makes clear that the more people we have involved in the process, of designing change, we've got to find ways of involving them on a sustainable basis in the change management process. But here's where we start talking about the language of business, okay? And we're going to have these videos. I'm going to send you a link to something called a Change Management Resource Center. So I asked you yesterday if you would, set up that HCI account. I'll go ahead and send you an elevator, or send you an elevator. I'll send you an email with that information in there, and you'll have a link to different videos if you want to reference them again. But this is a lady, Jane. She came after my time, but it's very interesting as you watch what she says, not only about the language of business and behavior change, but she's got a little formula she brings up. And I'd like you to think about that as you watch this, and then we'll come back and discuss it. So let me share Jane talking about the language of business.
So we started with changing the language. When I first introduced concepts of change management to my business, I spoke in change management terms. I talked about ATCO and ProSci. I talked about the 8-step Cotter model. I talked about change sponsorship spine. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy in talking about it and educating my business partners. And quite frankly, occasionally I was pontificating. And then somebody was kind enough to finally give me feedback, radical feedback. Didn't feel good at the time, but it made a huge difference because it clicked with me. See, this is not a US accent. This is not a Northwest Arkansas, Bentonville accent, as you may have noticed. But when I moved to the United States 18 years ago, while English is not my first language, I did speak English, and I spoke it fairly well, except for I spoke British English, accent and everything. I said things such as privacy, and that needs to go into the boot of your car. And it would have never occurred to me when I came to the US to make everybody else speak British English, right? So I changed my language pattern. I now have more of an American accent with a slight undertone of subtle German. And I live and apply the culture patterns of the US. And we needed to do the exact same thing in change management. So for the first time after coming to the Walmart US business, I actually shut up. And I started to listen to what the organization was already talking about. So they didn't talk about sponsorship spine, but they talked about leadership cascading and how we cascade messages through leadership in Walmart. They love that term. It's kind of the same thing, right? They didn't talk about sponsorship They didn't talk about how do we make sure that everybody is on the same page. They talked about alignment and synergies. Walmart loves those words. So we started talking in the same words with them. Secondly, we changed the conversation. Now that we were speaking the same language, we could actually focus on changing the conversation. And we made the conversation about one thing, and that was behavior change. And we started with a question. And we said, Mr. or Mrs. Executive, if you think about your return on investment, right? $2.7 billion investment. There's a return calculation. I may not be privy to the numbers, but I know there's a return calculation there somewhere. How much of that return depends on people consistently changing their behaviors? Seemingly simple question, not easy to answer, but it changed the conversation because now it was not about change management is about making people feel good. Now it's about having people change their behavior so that we can actually get the business results that we want. And since we're talking about behavior, behavior is a function of three things. You want behavior change in your organization, you need to address three things. People need to be able to do it. I can do it. People need to be motivated to do it. I want to do it. And then last but not least, the environment needs to be there. It needs to be easy to be done. You can focus on those three things, great.
All right, so as you watched Jane through that, let me ask you, what kind of notes did you write down? What is it you think you could use from that at ATCO? What did you like? What's transferable? Common language, yep, definitely. You know, a lot of times specialists have a language that doesn't reflect the business language, yep. Definitely common language, yeah. Give me some other ones, please. So language of business, behavior change. What's been your experience when you've been successful on getting people on board? Listening, yeah. Thinking like the business, yeah, that's really, especially those of you with the HR business partner title, you know, you really are in a unique position where you have to understand the business and the HR side, you know, right up front. You got to know the business. Yeah. When you've seen effective behavior change, tell me that formula that she talked about, if you captured that. She'd said at the end, ability and two other things. Think about to drive behavior change. Yep, definitely motivation. You got motivation, you got environment, and you got ability. That's pretty good for late in the day. So she says that and I love that. And let me come back to that, Judy, because I think that's great insight, is behavior, the change, its ability and motivation and environment. And you've got to have all three of those. Think of how many times where you've had people who were able and had the motivation, but they didn't have the tools to do the job. You know, I remember once I was an HRBP before they called it that. And I remember spending 2 days in a hotel room in San Diego doing 11,000 entries into PeopleSoft because my analyst was out. And boy, did I appreciate my analyst after that. But I was having problems doing it. And I'm like, it's not working, it's not working. So I called up a friend of mine who was on the IT development training side. And she said, oh, you have to have caps lock on. I'm like, well, who the heck designed this? You have to have caps lock on, okay? But the idea and what Judy, I think you're referencing, is it's a multiplicative formula. If you have zero on any of those, the result is zero. Okay. So if people don't have the ability, it doesn't matter how much motivation or environment. If they've got the motivation, and they don't have the ability, so what? But I think where we miss a lot is on the environment. We would probably see a lower score on the environment. So if you apply that formula to your change challenge or some of the projects you're working on, yeah, the people may have the ability and the motivation, but if you don't create the environment, it's not going to happen. Okay. A lot of times that comes down to a lady on Tuesday where I'm working with a public group and the same content. And just this Tuesday, she said, for us, it's about changing the role of the leader. Another one said it was about getting the leaders on board emotionally. One said it was about changing the culture. So you're all going to have different pain points as you work through that. So think about not only language of business, what you're doing, but the idea in your organization. I'm sure your operations people don't care about leadership cascades and that kind of thing. One of my bosses, one of my VPs at the time, we had put in a new scheduling system. And, I saw somebody talk to him and rattle off all these facts and figures. He was kind of turning red, didn't get any, satisfaction out of that. And he said, hey, you're going to be out in California this week. When you find somebody good at adopting this system, call me. So I called them up. I got them on the phone. He recognized them. He said, I want everybody else in the market to come there and do it. And he said to me, what'd you learn from that exercise? I said, get people to adopt systems better. He said, no, not really. He said, what I want you to learn from that is you can talk about ROI and you can talk about adoption rates and you can talk about usage and all that kind of stuff all day. What I care about is seeing it happen and seeing them use it and scaling that and getting consistency. That's my return on investment, not your numbers, is actually seeing people use that. So I'm sure you have plenty of examples where you're in that same situation, okay? They want to see it happening. So don't get caught up in that specialist fallacy. And again, the words matter. So one of you brought up yesterday this idea of change sponsorship. So let's kind of dip our toe into it a little bit today. And there's a basic definition I won't read to you because you know how to read. Sometimes it's as large as a steering committee. It's the executive team. Sometimes it's just one project owner working with the project team. Depends on the change. Depends on how it's affecting the organization. Really, for large changes, though, it should be the highest executive who's got a connection to the change. If it's the whole business, it might be the CEO. She might be the one doing it. For a change that impacts the business unit, it might be the head or the president of that unit. So again, as you see some key responsibilities right there, the idea is you've got some more on page 17 in the toolkit. It kind of expands that out a little bit. And you've got a nice version of this next slide right there, just a repeat of it. Sponsorship, credibility, prioritization, and results. And, talks about 3 of the things that need to be there. But let me ask you, in your work, when have you had a great sponsor on a project, and how did that make the project successful? Okay. If you had a sponsor that was visible, active, and effective, what did that do for people's motivation? What did that do for the environment? How did that help getting the project done? Or come out of conversely, maybe a time you didn't have that. How did that make the project not work out? Good sponsor, bad sponsor. Definitely created buy-in, access to people, dollars, and tools. I think back to the same boss in my story, his name was Simpson. And Simpson was a real bulldog. And I went in one day and said, I'm trying to work on this project and I don't have access to the system. He said, what system? And I told him, and he said, well, who's responsible for that system? I said, this person. He said, well, why don't you have access to it? I said, well, I was told that that was access for VP level only and that I did not qualify to have access. He like looks down his phone list. He picks up the phone. He's like, Simpson here. Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, good. Hey, I got a question for you. My guy Mark here needs access to the system for a project I'm working on. And I could hear him because it was on the speakerphone. Said, well, he's not at the VP level. He said, well, I am, and I'd like you to put the access under my name and I can share my password with him if you want me to do that, or just give him access to it. And he's like, okay, I'll have it done in 5 minutes. Good. So sometimes, to John's point, they remove barriers. Absolutely. That's the work that they did with Project Oxygen at Google, was found out the number one thing that managers do is remove barriers, okay? Access to people, dollars, tools, okay? They also reinforce, yep, viewed as positive. Yep, good ideas, maybe no way to implement without the sponsor, yep. You may not have the authority, you may need that person to get people to go along, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hierarchy does matter, absolutely. I'm dealing with client one on some hierarchy issues too. And we can kvetch all we want about it, but when it comes down to it, that does matter. But yeah, they want to support you and they want to find ways to do it. So, again, thinking of this, ProSize benchmarking reports since 1998 have found that sponsorship is number one on the list of top contributors to the success of a change initiative. Okay. And you've got a little citation down there at the bottom from Hyatt Research by ProSci. But it gives it credibility. I mean, when they're in support of the change, people know it's valued at the top levels of the organization, and that leads to it being a priority. And yes, you got to work up your return on investment and your cost benefit and your adoption rates and that kind of thing. But it's absolutely, it's a priority for the people that need to work on it, but also for the people that get affected, the end users. Okay. The other thing that sponsorship does, it puts them in a position where they have an ultimate responsibility. Okay. So just like with our scheduling system, it's sharing that responsibility. It's not just an HR system or a scheduling system. It's something that affects the business. Okay. You can definitely link to an active sponsor who champions a change and gets rid of resistance and helps build alliances. So again, like we said yesterday, link to strategy, design for cultural accuracy, get senior leadership support. So kind of leads us to this idea of buy-in that Krista mentioned quite astutely, because buy-in is needed, but think about the buy-in, okay? If it's business initiated, a lot of times executives already convinced that they need to make the change. They might need convincing as far as more visible sponsorship, okay? They might need a reminder of the importance of change management and the steps people will go through, especially when we get into coaching. If it's an HR initiative, like a new performance management, system, it needs to have the business sponsor. If you can't make the business case, why is it being done? Okay. In those cases, you got to get the sponsorship, you got some work to do to get some buy-in on the change itself. So the idea, the green, you've got some built-in buy-in because your C-suite's saying it needs to get done. On the blue, you might need to work on the buy-in a little more. Okay. So again, being proactive, important, not just reacting to change, anticipating it, helping them to do it. With our HRBP course, we spend a lot of time on getting buy-in for HR solutions, but that's the main difference there. So what I'd like you to do is, over the next 6 days, is to think about getting buy-in, okay? So think about getting buy-in, and I think this is a good place for us to pick up next week with. But this idea of getting buy-in, I want to add just a little bit from that HR business partner course in here, and just give you, let's see, what did I do with that? Sorry, I think I wrote down the wrong info. I've got it here. As my family likes to remind me, I like to spread out. So yeah, there we go. 126. Oh, it's page one, not slide one. Sorry. I think it's very important here to make the business case. And I'd like to introduce you to 6 different business cases. You've used them. You probably haven't thought about them, though. You do. The first one is, fat fingers. The first one is the alignment case. And I don't think you've got a place for notes in your book on this because I've added it in. The alignment case, which is an easy one to make, links the change to strategy. Okay. And think about the degree of difficulty is it's easy and your best use is with executives. Okay. Alignment links, hey, we're doing this system because it supports this strategy that we are trying to accomplish. And that's a pretty easy case to make. Okay. That's a little different than the business case, which is a little harder. I'd say that's kind of a medium degree of difficulty, and usually best with financial audiences. What you're doing is you're defining and monetizing. Think about, especially with your accounting, your engineers, and your legal people that you work with. If you just make the alignment case, that probably isn't enough, okay? So best use is with financial audiences. And again, these cases get combined to be more compelling. So you might make the alignment and the business case. You link the change to strategy, but you have the financial proof with it. Definitely with IT, with financial audiences, legal, accounting, engineers, absolutely critical, because if you don't have the numbers, what are they going to do? They're going to ask for the numbers, right? The third one is another easy one. It's called the comparative case. And that's just you compare to the competition, comma instead of period. You basically relate it to other organizations. It's an easy one to make. I mean, if you're FedEx, it's easy to compare to UPS. If you're Hilton, it's easy to compare to Marriott, Apple, Microsoft. I mean, the closer to the competition, the easier that is to make, okay? The fourth one that you'll see, and these are all pretty common ones, is what's called the null case. And the null case, another easy one to make, but the null case is the cost of doing nothing. The null case is roll the film forward 5 years, and this is what things are going to look like. If we don't do something and we just roll the film forward, this is what the situation is going to look like in 5 years, in 5 months, in 5 days, whatever the timeline is. It's kind of a missed opportunity cost case, okay? The two that I want to bring up last are the hardest ones to make. One you've probably been using a lot in the last few months, given work from home and buy-in, is the continual case. It's a hard case to make. It's best used with teams, workforce teams, and it must be compelling, because what the continual case is keep plugging away. Keep pushing that rock uphill, okay? Keep working on this, okay? That's a more of an emotional case, a hard one to make because it's got to be compelling, genuine, authentic, but keep plugging away, keep working hard. And then the last case, and probably the most difficult, sometimes the most effective. Oh, I've got issues. The 6 key on my keyboard's not working for some reason. I'm trying to fix that. I knew I'd come across that by the end of the day. Here's a hard case to make, is the experiential case. It's really best used with skeptical audiences. It's the one where you're trying to get the mind and the heart appeal, okay? And we'll talk about that a little later next Wednesday when we pick up. and getting buy-in, but you're kind of going for more than just an intellectual buy-in, or it makes business sense or numerical sense. You're trying to get an emotional buy-in. I also call this, and a shout out to famous Canadian. To me, this is the Sarah McLachlan case. I don't know if they have this in Canada or Australia, but they've got the ASPCA, which is the Association for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. They do this thing about adopting dogs, and it's a commercial with Sarah McLachlan and her song Angel. So don't Google Sarah McLachlan, ASPCA, or Angel together. I've never seen the whole commercial because I always turn it off before. The idea is, I wish I was better at this during my career. You know, a lot of times you've got a go-to case culturally. Let me ask you, do you use one of these, one or two of these more than the others? Do you have at ATCO a go-to case that you make? Now that you've heard what they are, business case, financial, yeah, justify that, yeah. And that's a sure sign of a performance-based organization, one with a bias for action, yep. It's nice. That's why I was a little worried about the design thinking thing. And just to kind of circle back to design thinking and human-centered thinking, you'll find a Harvard Business Review article. I think it's called Let Go and Play. I also owed you the Sunstein book is How Change Happens. It's on Amazon, $14.99 US. Really good book, How Change Happens. But to circle back just for a moment to those, the Harvard Business Review said design thinking doesn't work in corporations. And as you dig into it, it's because they've adopted this idea of let go and play, go in a conference room and play with Legos. And they tell the story of the manager that walks by and sees this and calls the leader of the team. It's like, you know, we're in a budget crunch, we're in an expense crunch, and your people are in a conference room playing with bricks. Okay, what the heck is going on? Okay, so the idea is design thinking works, human-centered design works, yet think about using it in the creation, ideation, defining stage, not necessarily taking it to that level. Because I got to tell you, for a lot of executives, this is what change looks like. For a lot of you, that's what change looks like. So, you know, hopefully we gave you some good ideas today on things that will make your change more successful. What I'd like to do is go ahead and just say, as a reminder, I'll email it tomorrow, but as a reminder to ask you over the next week to finalize the elevator speech. That's on page 5 in the toolkit. The interviewing for empathy, to test that out with a peer, that was back on slide 15. And you've got a piece in the toolkit on that. And then to do a little reflection on human-centered design toolkit, page 16. And then we'll pick up next Wednesday with getting buy-in. So let me ask questions, comments, concerns as we kind of get towards the top of the hour. Anything else before we tie a nice bow on today? Well, let me end with a little story. You might see in my background, you can't really see it so well, but I've got a friend who's an artist, and I had him do, John did a nice painting of a buffalo for me. Real nice little piece of art. So I've got the buffalo up there to remind me always that, you know, there's a buffalo effect in business, okay? And sometimes, you know, we are like buffalo, we're extremely loyal and we follow one leader. You do what the leader directs you to do, you follow where the leader goes, you stand around waiting for the leader to show up when they're not around. Now, and there's my pack. Back in the frontier days, the early settlers learned this quickly. If they could kill the lead buffalo, the whole herd would stand around and get easily slaughtered because they didn't know what to do when the leader was gone. So for many years, leaders were taught that they needed to be like those buffalo leaders. Everyone assumed the leader's job was to plan, command, coordinate, control, give directions. And the best leaders were thought to be the ones with the most brilliant plans and the most loyal followers. Those were the people that had power, prominence, and control. They worked long hours. They were surrounded by people who compliantly did what they were told, no less, no more. Some of those old buffalo type leaders got pretty stodgy. They didn't change much. When they reached retirement age, they had a hard time letting go. They didn't want to give up the power. There was nobody in the pipeline to replace them. And even worse, if the leader got sick or finally toddled out the door and retired, the organization struggled to find somebody qualified to take over. Then they would go externally to find somebody. And, that became a big problem with coaching and adoption with culture. So the idea is with the buffalo is don't be a buffalo. Take responsibility for your own career and development. You're the author of your own story, but don't let 19th century management techniques from a 20th century buffalo derail you. You're a 21st century leader. And I hope we've given you some tools to be a better 21st century leader and better around change management. So with that, I will tie a bow on today and say thank you very much. I'll send a follow-up tomorrow. And you've got my contact information, so email me between now and next Wednesday if there's anything I can do for you. So I'll stay online for a couple minutes if anybody wants to chat, but thanks for a great afternoon and morning in Australia, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
John, you must be getting breakfast.